Welcome to Spotlight. I'm your host, Amitha. Join us weekly to get inspired by guests who go above and beyond to bring about progressive change in our communities. The world is currently dealing with the COVID 19 pandemic, and US is among the top countries with the most cases. If that wasn't enough, the recent election has created more distress. Decisions made in Washington have an impact globally, so we need to pay close attention to the outcome of this election, which is far from over. Today, our guest will give us more insight. With over 30 years of experience in public policy, advocacy, and management, it is no wonder that this veteran political observer is sought after globally. It's with pleasure I welcome to our show Mr. Marc Kealey.
Mika, how
It's
are
a
you?
pleasure.
It's a real
Good.
pleasure to see you again.
Yes, always great to have you.
Thank
And
you.
you had given us a lot of insight last time on a different topic. So
Yes,
today it's about the elections. But before
sure.
that, enlighten our viewers a bit about your background, like your educational and your professional career thus far.
Sure. So I've been in politics for over 40 years, I could tell you that. And either as a volunteer or as a paid staffer, I worked for John Turner when he was prime minister and then leader of the opposition in Ottawa for a good number of years, and then spent the balance of my career as a professional, either in healthcare or what we're doing now, global management. But I think it's what's really interesting for your viewers, Amit, is the fact that the chairman of our firm was John Turner, former Prime Minister of Canada. So he and I had opportunity, not only when he was in politics and I served with him, to look at things like free trade, but other global issues as well. We had done an awful lot of work in Europe, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and China. So I think that gave us a pretty decent idea about how things are going. And I think you're absolutely correct. At the outset, you made mention of the fact that the United States is really the global, what we call it, the incubator for any kind of political decision making. And that certainly we've seen over the last 4 years.
Amazing. So now our viewers have an idea of where you're coming from, and all we're going to be talking about today is validated with all the experience you've had.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the major relations between US and Canada and some of the key projects that both the countries are involved in.
Well, I think, and your viewers probably know this intuitively, that Canada and the United States share the longest freestanding and peacetime border of any two countries anywhere on Earth. That's number one. Number two, we are the United States' largest trading partner, and they are our largest trading partner. We're inextricably linked because the majority of Canadians live along the 49th parallel, which is really the top of the United States. So I think in a lot of ways, we are inextricably linked by geography, but culturally, I think there are some major differences between our two countries. And if you look at it, Canada tends to be a lot more moderate and a lot more centrist and left of center, because we've really developed a strong social safety net, as opposed to the United States, which is highly competitive. And I think it's unfair oftentimes to compare Canada to the United States. But the only reason we do that is because we're so close.
Mm-hmm. And now the projects that are very important, again, with decisions made in US affecting the Canada, what are some of the top ones right now?
Well, obviously, between Canada and the United States, the biggest issue that we face all the time, and we've had this now ongoing for almost 40 years, is freer trade. So, Canada is a resource-based economy, and the United States is a manufacturing economy for all intents and purposes. So from that perspective, a lot of what we could produce here in terms of natural resources gets shipped to the United States to be manufactured and then back to Canada. Over the last 40 years with free trade and now the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, there have been some really good opportunities for Canada, the United States, and Mexico, particularly those three countries in North America, to benefit from freer trade across our borders. And that's been a good thing up till now. I will say this, and one of the issues I think we had to face off against in the last 4 years during the Trump administration is thinking in the United States about it being more insular. And, when you talk about isolationism, and look, that's always been an issue that the United States have had to face off against even since World War II and before that. But isolationism in the context of a free trade world, because the world is now becoming globally free traders, it becomes very problematic. And that's what we've had to deal with.
So that is one of the major issues since President Trump took office in 2016 that may have been affected. Now, what are some of the other things that may have been affected, or why is it that when the Republicans, defeated the Democrats in 2016, this time the tables have turned? Are there some things or some projects over the past 4 years that could have led the voters to change their mind during this election?
So I think that's a great question, and I'll answer it this way. So if you look at what happened in 2016, what 2016 was a referendum on political correctness. It was a referendum on how Americans viewed how their central government in Washington was managing the affairs of its country. And so I think Trump became that galvanizing figure for right of center base of voters. And they said, we don't want that. We want to see somebody who really cares about the United States first. Because, the United States had become sort of the dominant world figure and had been involved in things that I think made Americans feel like they were losing control. So he engendered that spirit at the time of 2016, and voters said, yes, we're going to support that. So not because they latched on to Donald Trump, but he became emblematic of the need for Americans to want to embrace that kind of thinking. Over the 4 years, I think what Donald Trump's presidency or the legacy has proven is that if you're not a professional or if you don't have experience in politics, it can really hurt your administration, which I think he proved over the last 4 years. And look, I think that the United States, the biggest problem the United States has now, Amitha, is that it's so galvanized with supporters who, the base who support the Democrats and the base who support the Republicans. And there's really no, what they like to call in politics, the mushy middle anymore. So there's no way to galvanize people not to vote for a Democrat or if you're a Republican, and not to vote for a Republican if you're a Democrat. That's really played out in this 2020 election. I'll even say this, that the 2020 election is not a referendum on the Democrats or the Republicans. It's a referendum only on Donald Trump.
Very interesting point. So let's go towards the current election. But before that, it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to veteran political observer Mr. Marc Kealey about the outcome of the current US election. So now we have an idea based on what you've given in terms of the background, between the relations between US and Canada, what has happened over the past 4 years. Now let's come to the current election. First of all, tell us what happened from your viewpoint. When an election results usually comes out, early on. We had a whole week plus before we actually knew. I know US has a kind of a history of contested elections. So tell us about this time's election.
I want to, before I answer that, I think the biggest question I'm asked all the time from people who want to know about the American election is, hey, what happened? And they always, they ask the question in the similar vein that you did. I think people are just so astonished by what they saw. I will say that one of the things that, if you were looking at how do you go about saying what has Donald Trump been successful in doing, and I think he was very successful in attracting people to vote. The American electorate is notorious for not voting en masse. So, you get sometimes the voter turnout could be as low as 38%. When Barack Obama won in 2008, I don't even think they got 60% voter turnout. And there are a lot of people that wanted to see that guy get elected president. But here we are in 2020, voter turnout was better than 70%. So Americans were really, really motivated to vote. And when you think about the outcome, and this is why I think Canadians and maybe even other international observers to this don't have a real understanding of the culture around the decision that the Republicans are making. Donald Trump got 74 million votes and Joe Biden got 79 million votes. So when you think about that in the context of what you have here, that's more of a dead heat than when President Kennedy ran as a candidate to be president against then Vice President Nixon back in the early 60s. So I think you've got a real remarkable outcome in terms of the historic context around which this election was fought. And now I think we're going to see the exposure of a lot of sort of politics as it relates to the outcome. I say that because what your viewers ought to know is it's not so much popular vote in the United States, similar to here in Canada, although we have two different systems. In Canada, its popular vote gets you, you could have a Pyrrhic victory, but if you don't win enough seats to get a majority government in a parliamentary democracy, you're not going to be the government. In the United States, the Electoral College, each state in the United States has two senators. Therefore, they have two Electoral College seats plus the number of seats that they have associated with their representation in Congress. So in a lot of cases, you've got some very tiny states with 3 Electoral College votes because they have a congressional member and 2 senators. That's the system that they've put in place since the founding of that nation. And so I think people really are now thinking, why is Trump doing this? Because I believe he thinks that on December 15th, Amitha, is when the Electoral College votes. And I think he thinks that he could do enough politicking now to have some of those Electoral College votes vote for the Republicans.
Interesting. So thank you for making it clear, people who come from Canada and are understanding the Canadian system, it's harder to make sense of what exactly happened down there and how it all works down there. And now, so we are waiting for December 15th, but what do you think will happen? The president incumbent is refusing to concede.
And look, this is just me as a casual political observer, and I don't have the answers to this, but I watch a lot and I have a lot of friends in Washington. And what I'm hearing them say is, you know what, Trump has to do this. He's galvanizing his base, and his base at 74 million votes it's pretty significant. So he can't let them down and can't sort of walk away. But what I think, and you're seeing that play out right now with challenges in some of the states where he's looking at having some of those election margins reversed, or some of the voters who he thinks have been, there's some hanky-panky. I think he's looking at that in the context of how he could whittle that down, and he might get the Electoral College votes as a consequence. But I think what will end up happening is December 15th will come. The Electoral College will vote in the exact same context under which they said that Biden is the president-elect, and he and Kamala Harris will assume the transitional role of being president and vice president-elect.
Well, it is, a moment in history, especially with the Vice President Kamala Harris, taking office, which it is definitely a moment in history, not just for women, people of ethnic backgrounds. So in your opinion, can we look forward to in the coming months, either both before the president-elect takes office and after the president-elect takes office?
Great question. And I think if I could be really bold, I think we're going to see a whole bunch more drama over the coming weeks. And I just think that's going to make, it's going to make people tune into shows like yours just to find out more about what's going on, to sort of look at what this means for relations with other countries, whether it's Mexico or Canada or India or China. So I think you're going to see that over the next little while, we're going to be very tuned into how Trump is going to act. I'll say this and then I'll get right to the nub of your question. We have never seen an individual like this in the U.S. Political system ever. And he really, he is a really unique sort. And I think that, he's sort of playing that out. But at the end of the day, he still has, he represents a very large segment, almost half, of supporters for the kind of politics that he represents in the United States. And I think that's a really fascinating dynamic. But to get to the nub of your question, the United States now has a president-elect and a vice president-elect, and they're putting their transition team together. They're looking at how they move forward on things. And I think you've seen yourself that Biden has been talking to world leaders about where he sees himself. And he's been talking a lot to Canada. He's been talking a lot to Europe. He's been talking to other countries in other jurisdictions. And I think he's saying, I want to put the United States back on a plane where we're not so isolationist anymore. And I think you're going to see something in the next little while that's going to change that. I think your point about Kamala Harris is absolutely accurate. I don't think anybody in the world would disagree that she's a breath of fresh air. She bridges the cultural boundaries. Not only is she a strong woman, but she's got an incredible base. Plus, she bridges not only African American culture, but South Asian culture, and I think that's just wonderful. And she lived 10 years in Canada. Lucky us.
So she's bringing the whole globe into the White House.
Yes.
So yeah, it's definitely a breath of fresh air to see the Alex. But like you said, there's going to be a lot of drama, going up to the day of when they take office. I guess if people are, bored of all the drama that we find in fiction, they just tune in. And like you said, the globe, the whole world is going to be watching what happens over the next couple of months.
Yes.
But if we come back to where we are right now, Canada, how is it going to impact us?
Well, I'm going to say something that might inflame some of your viewers, but I can tell you when a Republican is in the White House, we generally fare much better as Canada in terms of free trade. Democrats tend to be a little more or a little less freer when it comes to trade. And we've always had that sort of yin and yang between Democrats and our national government in Canada on trade issues. So I'm interested to see where that's going to play out. Obviously, the current US-Canada-Mexico agreement, there are still some niggling issues that we have to contend with on trade. So I'd be fascinated to see if maybe our current prime minister and his government could really shake the trees in a way that's going to get the Democrats to see that they need to pay a lot more attention to where the opportunities lie. I'll give you this as one classic example on the Keystone XL pipeline. The Republicans had said, yes, we'll agree to that when we know traditionally that the Democrats had said no to the Keystone XL several times. Yeah, that's going to be
interesting. We'll have to wait and watch, but hopefully it'll be positive. I guess we keep hope. And again, since our prime minister is, open to conversation and president-elect seems to be open to conversation as well, maybe we may be surprised. Maybe it may be in our favor.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, there's an old saying in politics that people govern people. So if there's, you always want to do business with people you like. So we know that Biden and Trudeau like each other. So we'll see how that shakes out. And I think your point too about Kamala Harris is she knows this country. So it'll be very interesting to see.
So in short, it's going to be an interesting next couple of months. And I mean, what interesting times we live in. We couldn't ask for anything better, to divert our attention from all the other pandemic related, issues that are going on. We have more to talk about, but it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to the veteran political observer, Marc Kealey, who is giving us some insight into the current US elections and its impact on Canada and globally. So now we have an idea about, what we can expect from your perspective and how it can impact Canada with some of the ongoing projects. Let's turn to the world now.
Sure.
Can you enlighten us on some of the major projects that may be affected when President-elect and Vice President-elect take office?
That's a really loaded question. I'll tell you why. I think that the current administration in the United States has said we have to we're gonna do what we do about China. China has become a bit of an issue for the United States, and I'm saying that with my tongue in my cheek. I suspect that that President-elect Biden will probably double down on China. And you know, China is a very interesting example, Kavita, because I think what they will say is we're not an enemy, we're a competitor. And I think the United States welcomes competition. That's just how their whole country's been born. So it would be very interesting to see what they do, given the issues with Huawei and Meng Wanzhou here in Canada, and how that's going to play out. We're seeing that sort of wend through the legal system as we speak. So I think China will become a very large issue. And you see what's happening in China too. They're starting to look at Asia Pacific. And that becomes an issue that I think really affects Canada, the United States, Mexico, and even South America. And I see China galvanizing support from other countries, which could become a real big problem for the United States. More importantly, and I think you saw that last week, at the ASEAN summit, well, if you can call it a summit when it was virtual, all the ASEAN countries had said we're going to have our own agreement to do free trade among all those ASEAN nations. And I think that, you know, they represent a little better than a quarter of the world's population. That's a large cohort. So I think in that context too, the United States has to look at how it views its partners who are now in a trade talks with China. So really, really fascinating from that perspective. Here's another interesting one too, and I think your viewers would like that. India and the United States have a really decent relationship, and a long-standing relationship, and so does Canada and India. But what's really fascinating is if you look at the dynamic between India and Pakistan, and I think that's always been a big problem for a lot of people in the world because it's so unsteady. Pakistan has a relationship with China, and I think we'll look to that. I'm not saying there'll be some unease, but I think in a lot of ways, those two nations, Pakistan and India, have considerable heft in that part of the world as well. And I think the United States is going to have to look at that as well. The other opportunity I think that the United States is going to have to really play out is, and I think you made mention of this at the start, and you're a physician, so you know, is the whole global pandemic. I think the United States has made this a political issue, when I think in a lot of ways you can't play to your base because your base doesn't believe in things like vaccines or wearing a mask or those kinds of issues. As a physician, you're trained to be not only a scientist, but you're trained to be practical as it relates to that. And it's not wise to not wear a mask. It's not wise not to get vaccinated. So I think that's going to be an issue that the current administration has really been how shall I say, they've been judged by the United States, because I could tell you that probably more than a third of Americans are really happy that Trump lost, and way less than that are happy that Biden won. So I say that to you, that this COVID pandemic has been the issue that is really going to affect issues with relations globally in the coming years.
Yes, very interesting. And I believe like President-elect Biden may have also used that to his advantage. I mean, even, major advantage. I mean,
Absolutely.
In these times, just like you mentioned, as a physician myself, I just couldn't get it through my mind how President incumbent Trump was not really promoting what us as physicians or frontline workers or scientists promote, which is the mask wearing and taking precautions with COVID-19. Now, since we are on that topic, and
Sure.
I know you're a leading voice in healthcare transformation as well, what is your take on the vaccines that we hear of now?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that question. No, really, seriously, it's one of the things that I want to write about this in some journals, because they've asked for some opinion about this. My point is, if you've got, say, for example, Moderna and Pfizer, who are both creating vaccines right now, and people say, wow, Pfizer's going to put out 50 million vaccines. This is great. The problem is we live in a world where everyone is affected by COVID-19. Last time I looked, the world has 7 billion people. So 50 million is a very, very small number of vaccines. What I would think that the World Health Organization or that the United Nations would look to doing is saying, let's have multiple pharmaceutical companies take the patent that Pfizer has and Moderna have developed for vaccines and give it to everybody to manufacture, so that we can do in the world right now for COVID-19 what we did in the world for polio or for smallpox, so that because we know that this has got to have global reach, and 50 million is not enough. So you're going to see some fighting happening, and you're seeing that already, where even in the province of Ontario, we're fighting with the feds on how many vaccines we're going to get here in the province of Ontario, and everybody else can go the way of the worry-free. I don't think that's the right way to do this. I think we have to be a lot more. What's the word? We have to be a lot more sharing on this. And I think that to say to Pfizer or to Moderna, your share prices are going to skyrocket and your shareholders are going to get very, very wealthy, when what we need to be doing is to say to people, let's get everybody vaccinated.
Well, thank you so much for that expertise opinion, because it's really confusing times thinking about what's going to happen, in the upcoming months, even with the vaccine. But it's been a pleasure talking to you today, as
And you too.
always,
Yes.
to get all the insight we can for these interesting times with the U.S. elections. Do you have any final words for our viewers as to how they can stay informed until the actual president-elect, Biden takes office?
I sure do. And I think that people should concentrate more on looking at, veritable sources of information rather than social media, Facebook. I think though they're really founded on algorithms. And I don't think that people are getting accurate news. They're getting opinion. You need to have considered opinion. You need to have real veritable information. So I think good news sources, even like your show with folks who understand issues, people should tune in and people should read more and not just look at social media.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to more from you. Thank you.
Okay, good to see you.
Thank you. So that was Mr. Marc Kealey, who has given us more insight about the US elections and its impact on Canada and globally. Well, that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for watching us. Continue to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Spotlight at ethnicchannels.com. Until next week, this is Amitha signing off, encouraging you to stay informed.